I am Tracy for Light 87 and this is Kota Uda. This is the Kota, I am Uda, and with me today Hazel Rajiah from Emerge Lanka Foundation. Now, what are we Kota Uda about today? Well, something that really affects all of us. Affects us in the sense that it's something that happens within a family. It's something that's often kept a secret. It's something that often has very far-reaching repercussions, not just for an individual, but also for a family and an extended community. Let me tell you a little bit about Emerge Lanka Foundation. It's a foundation that works with abused girls, very specifically, and empowers them, educates them, and then rehabilitates them. Job skills, the confidence to go out and live on your own. Those are just some of the very important things that Hazel and her team do. And we wanted to speak to you most particularly about the rising rate of child sexual abuse in Sri Lanka, and not just child sexual abuse, but also physical abuse, mental, emotional. It's all abuse, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. The numbers have been just crazy, as we've all heard. There hasn't been a day that has passed that we haven't heard news either online, on our news channels, about another child that has faced some form of abuse. It has been, and then there was a few weeks back that every single day there was either a murder, a rape, or an abuse of a child. And it was just overwhelming, even for us as child rights activists. It was overwhelming to see these numbers. And what's the challenge for us, the continuing challenge is, as of now, without the 2022 cases, there are 20,000 cases with the Attorney General that's still pending. So I can imagine that we're going to add about 5,000–6,000 over the course of this year on a very guessed estimate, but it's a lot. It is a lot. And every day we can see the forms of abuse are worsening. It's from child molestation to rape to physical harm and now the newest thing is, in our economic crisis, child trafficking. Either for the sex trade, for labor abroad, especially in the 15 to 18 category when a child can pass off as an adult. The kidnappings are just increasing, Tracy, and it's a lot. It's a lot right now.
I was looking up trying to find statistics, and I saw an article, I believe it was from the Daily Mirror, that stated that last year there were 10,300 child abuse cases reported, and that's just the number that's reported.
Yes. UNICEF, actually, a research found that in Sri Lanka, less than 5% is reported.
Right.
So if you put 10,300 in the perspective of less than 5% against our population, you can imagine the numbers are overwhelming. I recently saw that 1 in 4 of every girl in Sri Lanka has faced some form of sexual abuse. And it ranges from actual, like molestation, sexual abuse, rape, to even harassment on the streets, just 1 in 4 at a minimum.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the abuse is committed by people close to the child, family members. Would I be correct in saying that?
Absolutely accurate. Right now, it's over 90%. It was 80%, I think, the last time I was on the show with you. And now it's actually estimated at 90-something% at being incestual or somebody known to the child. And it's less than 8% that actually stranger danger. So that means that our children are vulnerable in their own homes. They are vulnerable in the very place that should protect them. They are vulnerable to the people who should be their first line of defense. I'm sure we've all heard of that case recently in Monoragala where a girl was abused by 3 members of her own family. Very, very close. And what broke my heart was when her abuse came out, the sister came out and said, the younger sister. So that was even, she was younger than 10. the sister, and she's been through the same abuse. So can you imagine one family, 2 children, 2 girls abused by the nearest family members to them, blood relations? Where does that leave the rest of us?
I mean, I'll tell you frankly, it leaves me with my blood boiling. Can you tell me what motivates, and would I also be right in saying that the majority of these criminals are male?
Yes.
What is it then in this very sort of virtuous and disciplined society that leads men to commit such acts of violence against their children? Can you talk to me about what you think? Where does that come from?
I think, first of all, the fact that we are repressed as a society about sex, sex education, proper education on why incestual sex is bad, how children should protect themselves. I would agree to a certain extent that yes, there is a lot of expectation placed on the woman, but there's also a lot of expectations placed on the boy child. Don't cry, be strong. A woman is an object. You are the head of the household. In other words, you get to tell the woman what to do. A woman is property because when she has to get married and she has to belong, just like you said, she has to be protected, right? There is a certain entitlement that is taught to the boy child, and as he grows up, he views any woman who doesn't fall into that category. Because you hear the older women in our society saying things like, she wore a short dress and went, so that's why the boy is kind of, like she was abused. If she hadn't gone to a club late, if she hadn't gone out with her boyfriend late, they grow up with a sense of entitlement.
If she hadn't just been walking on the road, minding her own business.
Exactly. And it's very sad because a lot of the times, and Tracy, this is honest feedback that I have received from certain partners that we work with. Oh, if the child was a good child, she would have spoken to somebody the first time she was abused. It's because she liked it that she stayed. And we are talking about 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, if she was provocative in some way. And a man is a man regardless of, and this is not the father who's saying it, but rather certain people who should be protecting the child in terms of even officials, right? Who would say, oh, a man is a man, so if you dress provocatively at home, a man is still a man, whether he's your father or not. It is such a sense of entitlement that the entire onus is placed on the girl to keep herself safe.
That's right, the child.
On the child. And
when you're 8 or 9,
yes,
obviously there's a certain amount of fear, isn't there?
Yes.
And there's also, someone like a father saying, this is our little secret.
Exactly.
If you tell anyone, the family will fall apart.
Yes.
It'll be your fault.
Yes.
Now, when you put all that on a child, how do you imagine that child will come forward then and say, I am being hurt?
And also, you are brought up as a child. I mean, think back to your relationships with the people you trusted the most. It can be your father, your mother, your grandmother, grandfather, anybody. And place yourself in a situation where the person you trust and love the most is the person who's hurting you. Who else would you be able to go to? Because here the person who you respect, love, trust the most is the one who's tearing your life apart. So where do you go? Because also, and just like you said, Tracy, the other threat is, if you say something about me, they will take me away to jail. And then the child thinks, I love my father, I love my grandfather, my uncle, my mother, whoever it is who's abusing me. I can't say anything because I will lose them. A child is innocent. They don't know how to hate. They don't know how to draw boundaries for themselves because the people who should be teaching that. So the easiest thing for them is to say, it doesn't matter, I'm just going to keep quiet. And then if somebody else finds out about it, the child gets pregnant, and I'm still talking child, I'm still talking 12, 13-year-olds, right? Or even younger, they get pregnant, 11-year-olds sometimes. And then the thing is, and just like what I said, oh, she must have liked it. Like a good girl would have come forward. It is such a sense of entitlement, Tracy. And it is also a lack of knowledge about sex. Sex is such a shameful secret, right?
Why?
I mean,
is that?
The good image, because
Right?
sex has somehow become bad.
Virtue.
Yeah.
But it's actually ignorance.
Yeah.
It's actually you're promoting ignorance. And if you look at the health science textbooks, they're full of misinformation. I've seen some of it, and you know, especially the way they talk about rape and sexual abuse.
Yes, and we do reproductive health, right, as part of our curriculum. So whenever we go to teach children about reproductive health, we ask questions like, by you teaching them, they are going to go and have sex. I mean, Tracy, I don't think it takes a reproductive lesson for kids to experiment, right?
Listen, teenagers of a certain age, whether you like it or not, whether you will admit it or not, they will have sex.
Yes.
The best we can do as parents is ensure that they do it safely and carefully, and that they learn how to read the signs, that they learn that no means no.
Consent.
Boys and girls.
Yes.
You know, instead of making men and women feel so alien to each other, that the only way you can express your attraction for someone is in a very rude and coarse manner.
way.
Right? Because what else do you know? Yeah. What else have you been taught?
And I think, I mean, I'm no one to judge the porn industry, but I think the porn industry also plays a huge role in that without sex education, if your first introduction to sex is the wrong genre of porn. Like recently, there was a case, and I think I've spoken about this with you before, is where a set of boys raped one of the boys' cousins, right? And when they were very young. They were like, the boys were like 14, 15, and the girl was 16 or 17. And when the police came and it became a big deal, they had said, but we saw it on the porn and the girl liked it in the end. They had no clue that what they did was wrong because they thought she will be okay with it in the end. And I think porn without sex education, porn without a proper guidance, leaves a very warped, broken view of women, of men, and and so easy to degrade women based on what they see. Yeah. Right? It's so easy to degrade men based on what they see. And this plays such a huge role, Tracy, because do you know that Sri Lanka doesn't top a lot of lists for positive reasons. However, on a recent, and I think it was a leading porn site that had actually released a viewership, Sri Lanka was in the top 5 of that viewership.
I think we've been in the top 5
for a long time.
Decades.
And the most violent genres were reported against Sri Lanka and actually Southeast Asia, but mostly Sri Lanka. So it was mostly rape. It was, like forced sex. These were the categories listed under. So when you have a generation of men who are walking around with these experiences in their heads and they actually have access to young girls, what are they not going to try out, Tracy? How would they see girls as anything other than objects? Yeah. And like you said, our textbooks unfortunately have such a clinically I don't sterile version of what sex is.
Yeah, and often sort of incorrect definitions of things like abuse and rape.
And it's always go and ask your mom to talk to you about it, or go and talk to your dad about it because a science teacher is feeling too awkward to discuss this lesson in school.
It's weird, isn't it? We talk about the miracle of birth, the miracle of life. Why then are you teaching children that the way that this miracle happens is dirty and bad? You know, it
doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense at all. But here's something I'd like to ask you. Now, how can you tell, say, someone in a family is being abused and not talking about it, and if you are in that family, how can you tell that someone is being abused? Are there signs?
Yes. Yeah? There are certain signs. Sometimes, and I do want to preface this by saying there are some children who go through abuse without displaying any external signs, because that's the way they react to things, you know, the flight and fight response, right? So some of them tend to freeze up and not show any external. So don't feel bad as a parent you've missed it, but there are signs. If a complete behavioral shift, so a child who has previously been very talkative, very outspoken, outgoing, suddenly tends to become very quiet, withdrawn.
Okay.
That is a sign that something is wrong, and it just doesn't sign sexual abuse, but it means that something is wrong. There could be bullying, could be anything. A child that was previously very quiet, suddenly becoming very hyperactive, you know, very overstimulated in that sense, right? Also a sign that something is not right.
What do you mean by overstimulated?
In the sense, very hyperactive,
Okay.
Tracy.
Okay.
So like, you know, like unable to concentrate,
Okay.
unable to sit in one place, always on the go. You might notice a lot of more mischievous behaviors in the child.
Right.
There may be a little more violent tendencies, maybe physically hitting out against other children. So just a lot of, and you would see that the child would take a lot for the child to just be able to calm down. And that's also one of the ways that it manifests out. And then you have inappropriate sexual behavior based on their age. So if you see like an 8-year-old who is mimicking sex acts, who's being inappropriate with an adult, it doesn't mean the child is bad, because that's what we always say, my God, look at that child already behaving like a bad child, right?
Yeah,
It's not. It just means that this is learned behavior. It either means the child has stumbled across inappropriate viewing material, or even worse, actually somebody showing children this, the child this, or abusing them. Because they don't know, the younger the child is, they don't know when to not behave like that, or whom to not behave like that with. So if you see that, do not blame the child. Try and find out where the child is learning this from. Very gently coax it out of the child. Accusing the child, where did you learn this from? Who taught you this? What are you doing? This is so bad. It's not going to get you anywhere. The child will stop, because they will think, okay, nobody believed me, nobody listened to me, so
and if I
just going to learn
truth,
to.
there's some sort of punishment.
Yes. And I think overall and also bedwetting is another very clear sign. A child who has stopped bedwetting suddenly resumes regularly wetting their bed. That is a very clear sign, because sometimes it's actually a physical impact of sexual abuse, where the child's body gets, you know, a little hurt, a little medically, he or she would have issues, but it also means that the child is having nightmares, night terrors, and night terrors are another thing. A child who had been previously sleeping through the night wakes up screaming, is afraid to go to bed, very much afraid of somebody. Note and watch why. Don't force the child to go close to somebody, right? Or a child gets overly attached to somebody all of a sudden, right? These are signs, behavioral changes. If you know your child, you will know when a behavior changes. Watch and have very open conversations with the child. As a parent, I'm not a parent yet, but I would assume that it's a hard conversation to have, right? It's a hard conversation to hear that somebody in your family, whether it is your own father, your husband, your uncle, has hurt your child. But the most important person in that situation is not yourself. I'm sorry to say that.
It's
neither
not yourself,
is it.
It's not your reputation.
Yes.
It's not your family's
Yes.
reputation. It is
The child who's vulnerable. Children are the most vulnerable beings in the world. I mean, you see animals, within 5 to 6 weeks, the animal is independent. A little kitten will hiss at you. A baby and a child is vulnerable. They have zero defenses. The only defense, and especially because they're not taught to defend themselves, the only defense, as a child rights activist, it makes me angry. As a survivor, it breaks me, because you think that the child should be believed. The child should be protected. And that seems the most normal thing to do. But like you said, our society is so entrapped in being good and respectful that we silence our children's voices. And that means that that child is abused through their life and the perpetrator has access to more and more and more kids. We've seen this happen time and time again.
And chances are that someone who survives that kind of abuse will commit or carry it out themselves.
Yes, and a trend that we're seeing in Sri Lanka is we see younger and younger perpetrators, and one of the reasons for this is exactly what you said, Tracy. You have children who have been abused, little boys who have been abused, little girls who have been abused, right? They turn 16, 17, they would do the same thing to their younger cousins, to their younger siblings, because they were told it was not wrong. Oh, your uncle was drunk, your aunt was having a bad day, it's okay. So what stops them from replaying that image to do that again? Because I was having a bad day.
I can do this.
And the child has to keep quiet because I kept quiet. I was told to keep quiet, so you keep quiet too. And you hear this, right? It happened to me, it wasn't so bad. It wasn't so bad, I'm fine now, so you'll be fine too. They're not fine. They're not fine. These are cycles that it's heartbreaking. We see it happen and we go and we talk to people. However, that sense of having to have a marriable daughter, a valuable daughter, a good daughter, right? Or a son who hasn't done anything just leads to our children being just broken. How I always think, you know, like you hear a news story, this 11-year-old who was raped by 3 family members. Does anybody stop to think where she is right now and what she is doing? Her pain, her sadness, she carries it with her forever. We will cry over her for a day. I mean, I cried over her for a day. I'm not crying today. As an activist, I'm not crying today because I have 100 other hers, right? As a general public, we will not remember her because we're in the middle of an economic crisis. She was headlines for a day. But parents remember that they carry this pain for all of their life. And it's not worth living a life like that.
In terms of the economic crisis, so you often have both parents in some queue or another.
Yeah.
So then it becomes very important, doesn't it, who you choose to leave your underage children with. And by children, we're talking about people all the way up to the age of 18.
Yes. I think knowledge is the only answer. As parents, this is the time you sit your children down and you tell them, we need to be out. These are the dangers you can face. If somebody touches you inappropriately, it's not your fault. Scream. Call us. Does your child have a way to run to a neighbor? I understand not everybody has a phone, but does your child have a way to run to a neighbor? To scream, if they are taught the first time somebody approaches them inappropriately, to shriek, to scream, to make a noise, it deters a lot of pedophiles. Talk to your children. Talk to them about the dangers of kidnapping. Trafficking is at an all-time high, right? Talk to your children about not talking to strangers. Talk to your children about not allowing people that you leave to look after them to abuse them. And tell them things like, I believe you more than anything else. I am your parent. You have to talk to me. I am out there for our family, but that doesn't mean bad things can happen to you. And it's not a problem to me if you tell me. Open, gentle conversations. Talk about the fact, and also talk to your children about sex. Because if you have 15, 16-year-olds left by themselves, they have plenty of time, like you said, Tracy, for experimenting, right? Talk to them about safe sex. If you find these subjects hard to speak about, contact organizations like Emerge Lanka Foundation, like Lead Sri Lanka, like Child Protection Force, run by Milani. Contact us. We are happy to talk to your children. We are happy to talk to you on how to talk to your children. Free resources. So many free resources. Reach out to us. Speak to your children. That's the only way you will protect your children. Leaving them with somebody you trust is not the only solution. Because it's the very people who you trust and they trust who's abusing our children at the highest rates in our country. And also, as parents, if your child has gone through abuse, right, I would like to touch on the fact that counseling is important. If you can't afford counseling because things are difficult, reach out to us. We can find you free resources. There's so many good verified free resources, not just Emerge, but our partners.
Yes.
There are emergency shelters. There are 2 shelters, for example, that we work with, and both of them are so dear to us. One is Sambal Foundation, and the other is the Nama Foundation, and both of them hold emergency. So if you need to get out of your house with your child, call us. We can arrange these things for you. There are options. Hard options, but we can help. So please do reach out.
Yeah.
We need.
Well, there you go. That's a very passionate and sensitive way of putting it. And thank you very much for taking the time to come in, Hazel. So do look for Emerge Lanka Foundation online on all social media. And your website is?
www.emergelanka.org.
Right. So all the resources that you're talking about.
Yes.
Would be
And you
available
can
there as
also
well.
call me. Let me give you my number. It's 076 003 5154. Okay. Available all the time.
Hazel Rajiah, thank you very much.
Welcome.
And
And
good
thank you
luck
for
with
having
Emerge.
us, Tracy.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.